Good morning, everyone. I think we'd like to get started. I know Chris has another engagement at noontime up in Madison, so we should begin the program here. Well, welcome to Authors on Stage, which we are pleased to bring to you with the cooperation of Elm Street Books. They've been a great partner in bringing great authors to New Canaan Library. Today, we're honored to host British author Chris Cleave, who we know is going to be an interesting speaker based on these few facts alone. He was born in London, spent his early years in Cameroon, and studied experimental psychology in college. He published his first novel, Incendiary, in 2005 when it won the United States Book of the Month Club's first fiction award. In 2006, it won the Somerset Maugham Award and was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. His second novel, which I know many of us have read, is Little Bee. It was a New York Times #1 bestseller and a Sunday Times bestseller in the UK with the title The Other Hand. Excuse me. Gold is his third novel. It is a breathtaking and emotional ride through the world of professional cycling, centered on a deep but ultra-competitive relationship between cyclists Zoe and Kate. Cleave brings to life these complex characters and poses the question of the value of friendship versus winning at all costs. Chris has been a barman, a long-distance sailor, a teacher of marine navigation, an internet pioneer, and a journalist. He lives in London with his wife and 3 children. He does enjoy a dialogue with his readers and invites all of us to introduce ourselves on Twitter, where he can be found at twitter.com/Chris Cleave and on his website, chriscleave.com. Please join me in welcoming Chris. Thank you so much for coming. And there's water here if you...
Thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I didn't think there was enough caffeine in the world to, to have a book event at 9 in the morning. I hugely admire you and thank you for being here in the morning to talk about books. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'd really like to thank the library for hosting us today. It's a terrific venue. I was amazed to see so many old friends in the audience today. Really honoured by some very special guests, including the parents and sister-in-law of my editor at Simon & Schuster. Honoured guests, thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to be here. I'd love to talk with you a little bit about my new novel, Gold, and also to answer any questions that you have about that or any of my previous work, or indeed about anything else. I had an event in New York last night where people asked me if I'd enjoyed Her Majesty the Queen's recent Jubilee celebrations and how well I knew the Queen. I enjoy questions and answers about the book. I always thought that a book should be a starting point of a discussion about the times that we live in. And this is what I hope I do with my writing. I try to tell timeless stories that are timely at the point of publication. So I always look 2 years ahead of where I'm writing, because that's roughly how long it's going to take to write a book and to get it published. And I like to say, well, what's going to be on people's minds in 2 years' time? Because if I think about that carefully and if I research that well enough, it has the effect that when that time comes, I can tell the backstory to the story that's going to be in the news. So a few years back, it was announced that London was going to have the right to host the Olympic Games of the summer of 2012. And this was a huge deal for a tiny country. Right? We are not very good at many things anymore, Britain. We're good at suffering in rainy conditions. That's our current specialist skill. And to realize that we were going to get the chance to do something extraordinary on the world stage was a big kick for everyone. You know, it made people very happy and very proud to be able to do it. I realized that the greatest show on earth was coming to my hometown of London. And like any great story, I realized that there was going to be a great backstory to it. So I decided that I wanted to write a novel about the experience of competing for an Olympic gold medal. And the reason I wanted to do that was because in these Olympians, we find what I believe are some of the most ambitious people on earth. It's extraordinary, the act of competing for gold. It's not really like other jobs. In most other careers, it's not necessary for everybody else to fail in order for you to succeed. It's a dark game, winning Olympic gold. We look at these athletes stepping up onto the podium for this very pure and joyful moment where their national anthem plays, the flag rises, there isn't a dry eye in the house, and we admire the strength of character of these Olympians. And actually, there's another way of reading that. What has happened is these people have just spent 4 years systematically crushing the dreams of many other people who would like to have been on that top step. Right? There's a difference between winning and beating people. And it turns out you have to do both to reach the top step of the podium. So I started looking at these Olympic sports. I started looking at things like, for example, the final of the 100 meters sprint on the athletics track. And this is always the showpiece of the Olympics. It's the event that 2 billion people on Earth are going to be watching in 3 weeks' time. And it's an extraordinary focus of the whole planet's attention. And it occurred to me suddenly that what we're watching there is the last 10 seconds of an intense psychodrama between rivals that has been playing out for 3 years and 364 days and 23 hours and 59 minutes and 50 seconds. And we're just going to be watching the last 10 seconds of this extraordinary piece of human theatre. So I wanted to tell the backstory. I became fascinated by the question of ambition, right? How much of our personal ambition we should sacrifice in the name of those whom we love. And this is a question, I think, that occurs to all of us every day when we're dealing with work, when we're trying to balance our professional obligations and our family. We're always asking, what comes first, ambition or love? But for very few of us, is it necessary to be so ambitious? Because in very few careers, is it true that there can be only one victor, only one person who succeeds? So I became interested in athletes, and I started interviewing them. I started going for training rides with athletes on the bicycle, because this was the Olympic discipline that I'd chosen to write about. And I started to become really interested in their characters. Psychologically, they're incredibly strong. Physically, they're totally explosive. And the depth of suffering that they go through, the dedication and the sacrifice in training, is exciting to write about because it's so far removed from the ordinary experience of life. So I started talking with them, and I was saying to these athletes, what is it like to compete? What's it like to race against someone? What's it like to have a rival that you really need to destroy in order to win? What does it feel like? And the answer they gave me was, really, it's hard to explain and you have to do it for yourself. So they threw down the gauntlet to me and told me that if I wanted to learn about racing, I couldn't ask questions about it and I would have to do it instead. And this was a huge problem. I was 3 or 4 months into my research by that point, really interested in the story, really wanted to tell it, was looking for my angle to tell it, and I'd just been told by my very helpful interview subjects that there was no way they could help me further, and I would have to go and become fit, which is a problem. I hope I don't impugn my fellow novelists when I say that we're not the most athletic people on earth in general. I guess you guys are a strong literary community, and you see a lot of writers coming up. And I think it's fair to say that for most of us, it would be safer to pass us a book than to pass us the ball. It was very hard. But I decided that I wanted to do it because I'm absolutely convinced that my work, which is very research-based, needs to have a kind of authenticity about it. And if I'm writing a race scene between 2 rivals, then I want you to feel that in your heart. You know, I want your heart rate to rise when you read a race scene. I want you to feel that you're in there on the track with these athletes involved in the competition. So I had to do it. So I trained very intensely on a bike for a month. I trained 20 hours a week, didn't do anything else. I just trained, ate, slept. And it was extremely painful. At the end of 3 weeks, I'd noticed nothing apart from that I was so tired, I really just wanted to die. After the end of a month, though, I had my first positive moment. I was in the shower one day, and I looked down at my legs, and I thought, oh, I've got someone else's legs. They had muscles and everything. It was encouraging. I carried on. I did another month of the training. By the end of the second month, I was able to cycle quite fast up hills that I'd previously only walked up. By the end of just over 2 months, I started to be able to beat my training partners up to the tops of these quite steep climbs. And I got a kind of savage joy out of this, which I didn't realize I had in me. It's like, wow, I've beaten my training partners. The other clue that something had gone dramatically wrong in my life was that I started referring to these people as my training partners. And previously I had called them my friends that I went riding with. I found myself 3 months into the training at the bottom of steep climbs, screaming motivational slogans at myself. I'd really cracked. I have a friend, she's called Siobhan Mullen, and 5 years ago she won the World Masters Championship in track cycling. So she's a world champion sprint cyclist in her age group, and she's a really impressive character. She, incidentally, doesn't flaunt this. She does have a world champion's rainbow striped jersey, which she displays in the kitchen in a frame. But it's, you know, there's got recipes tucked into the frame for scones and things like that. It's integrated into her life. She has 2 lovely daughters. I think the first clue that something is very different about this family is they recently went on holiday, on a cycling holiday to Iceland. And the daughters are 6 and 9. And the holiday was actually to cycle round Iceland, round the perimeter, which is a pretty long way and it's pretty steep. And I expressed mild surprise that their 6-year-old and 9-year-old daughters had enjoyed this holiday. And Siobhan was like, yeah, it wasn't as bad as it sounds though, because we only did 60 or 70 miles a day. They're genetically different, that family. They're really tough. But I've known Siobhan for years, like her a lot, she's a super person. I decided that I would gate crash one of her training rides to benchmark how well I was doing in my cycling training. We went out to North Wales, and the deal was that we would do a warm-up for 5 or 10 miles, and then we would start to race a little bit harder. And although it was unspoken, my agenda here was to say, well, look, I'm going for a bike ride with the world champion here. If I beat the world champion, then basically I am a world champion. And I may now write with some authenticity about what it feels like to race and to hold nothing back. And this was my objective. So we set out, and we got dressed up, we went out. The village we were in was called Borth in North Wales, and there's a 5 or 6% incline, a grade that comes out of Wales, out of this village in North Wales, up the hill to some reservoirs they have there. And we started cycling up it. And after about 2 minutes, I'd say I was in real trouble. I was suffering, I was out of breath, but I put myself on the front. I put myself ahead of Siobhan so that she couldn't see my face, critically. It's all about the psychology, this competition. I was projecting strength by having relaxed shoulders. So from behind, it looked as if I wasn't suffering as badly as I was. After about 5 or 6 minutes going up this pretty steep hill, I was in real trouble. My heart rate was almost at my maximum. I was perspiring. I was struggling for breath. But still, I was ahead of Siobhan, which I thought was a good thing. And also, she'd gone very quiet. And usually, she's ever so chatty. So I thought, well, this is going really well. I'm destroying the world champion. After about 25 minutes, my eyeballs were popping out of my head. I was all over the place. My legs had turned to jelly. They were only just turning around. But I could see the summit of the hill coming up. It was just ahead of us. Siobhan was still quiet, and she was still behind me. And it's like, she's in as much trouble as I am here. This is terrific. I'm beating the world champion. As we got up to the top of the hill, Siobhan suddenly pulled alongside me. And this is the first sign that something wasn't completely going right with my plan. She looked across at me, and I can only describe her expression as motherly concern. And she was fine. She was absolutely fine. And she wasn't perspiring. She looked slightly pink, like she'd had a good day out. Looked very healthy and cheerful. In her hand was her mobile phone. And this is why she'd been very quiet. It's because she was using an app on her phone to finish her online grocery shopping for her family. And that's why she hadn't been very talkative. We have a supermarket called Tesco Direct in the UK, which will deliver to you, and she'd been ordering her family's food for the week as we cycled up the hill. She then she put the phone back in her pocket, looked across at me and said, "Right, that was a great warm-up. Shall we go then?" And so I had to admit that maybe it was best if she went. And I freewheeled back down the hill into what I've since referred to as my ordinary life. It was amazing. It was extraordinary. It was a real wake-up call to realize that however much training I'd done, and by that stage it was a lot, there was still a huge gulf between me and people who are natural athletes. She was extraordinary, and I became more and more interested in these people, in the otherness of the lives that they live. So what I've done, I've taken two characters in this novel, Gold. One of them is called Zoe, and one of them is called Kate. Kate is slightly based on my friend Siobhan. She's a very good person. She's kind, she's funny, she has a life outside cycling, but she's just naturally incredibly talented. My other protagonist is called Zoe. Zoe has to fight very, very hard for competitive advantage because she's not as naturally talented as Kate, but my goodness, she's going to train harder, and she has nothing else in her life at all. She's sacrificed absolutely every single thing that the rest of us might derive joy and comfort from in order to be as quick as she possibly can on the bike. And so the book, Gold, charts the rivalry between Kate and Zoe across 3 Olympiads. So starting in Athens and going through the Olympic Games in Beijing and finishing up in the run-up to these Olympic Games in London. And I wanted to chart the question in the lives of these two athletes. What comes first, ambition or love? What wins out in the long run? What wins out on the track, and what wins out in life? And the answers, I think, are quite surprising. I'd like to introduce you a little to the character of Zoe in the book by reading, I think, from the beginning, if I may, and then maybe tell you a little bit about some of the other characters that you'll meet in the novel, and then answer any questions that you might have. The book's only been out for 4 days, so I guess people won't have read it, so I think it's the best if I just read a little bit from it so you can get a flavour of it. This takes place in August 2004 in the changing room of the Olympic Velodrome in Athens, just before the women's sprint cycling Olympic gold medal race. Just on the other side of an unpainted metal door, 5,000 men, women and children were chanting her name. Zoe Castle didn't like it as much as she thought she would. She was 24 years old, and she sat where her coach told her to sit, beside him on a thin white bench with the blue protective film still on it. "Don't touch the door," he said. "It's alarmed." It was just the two of them in the tiny subterranean changing room. The walls were freshly plastered, and little hardened curds of the stuff lay on the cement floor where they'd fallen from the trowel. Zoe kicked at one. It came detached and skittered away and dinged against the metal door. "What?" said her coach. Zoe shrugged. "Nothing." But when she'd visualized success, when she dared to imagine making it this far, the floors and the walls of every building in Athens had been platonic surfaces, hewn from an Olympian material that glowed with inner light. The air had not smelled of drying cement. There hadn't been this white plastic document wallet on the floor, containing the manufacturer's installation guide for the air conditioning unit that stood, partially connected, in the corner of the room. Her coach saw her expression and grinned. "Well, you're ready," he said. "That's the main thing." She tried to smile back. The smile came out like a newborn foal. Its legs buckled immediately. Overhead, the public stamped its feet in time. The start was overdue. Air horns blared. The room shook. It was so loud that her back teeth buzzed in her jaw. The noise of the crowd was liquidizing her. She thought about leaving the velodrome by the back door and taking a taxi to the airport and flying home on the first available jet. She wondered if she would be the first Olympian ever to do that simple, understandable thing, to quietly slope off from Olympus. There must be something she could do with herself in civilian life. Magazines loved her. She looked good in clothes. She was beautiful, with her glossy black hair cropped short and her wide green eyes set in the pale and haunted face of an early European saint. There was the slightest touch of cruelty at the line of her lips, a hint of steel in the set of her face that caused the eye to linger. Maybe she should do something with that. She could give interviews, laughing backstage after the show when the journalist asked, did she know she looked quite a lot like that British girl who ran off from the Olympics? What was her name again? Ah, Zoe would say, yeah, I get that question all the time. Whatever did become of that girl? Her coach's breathing was slow and even. Well, you seem okay, said Zoe. Yeah, said her coach. Why wouldn't I be? Just another day at the office, right? Correct, said Tom. We're just clocking in to do our job. I mean, what do you want, a medal? When he saw how she looked at him, he raised his hands in supplication. Sorry, old coaching joke. Zoe scowled. She was pissed off with Tom. It wasn't helping her at all, his insouciance, his pretense that this was not a huge deal. He was usually a much better coach than this, but the nerves were getting to him just when she most needed him to be strong. Maybe she should change coaches as soon as she got back to England. She thought about telling him now, just to wipe that faux wise smile off his face. And the worst part was that she was shivering uncontrollably despite the heat. Yeah, and it was humiliating, and she couldn't make it stop. She was already suited and warmed up. She'd given a urine sample and 8 cc's of blood that must have been mostly adrenaline. She'd recorded a short, nervy piece to camera for her sponsors, and she'd signed the official race entry forms, and she'd pinned her race number to the back of her skin suit. And then she'd removed it and pinned it back on again, the right way up. There was nothing left now to occupy these terrible minutes of waiting. The crowd noise went up another frenzied gear. She slammed the flats of her hands down on a bench. I want to go up there. Why are they keeping the door locked? Tom yawned and waved the question away. It's for our own safety. They'll let us up once security have checked the corridors. Zoe held her head in her hands and rocked back and forth on the bench. It was torture, being locked in this tiny room, waiting for the race officials to release them. She couldn't stop her body shaking, and she couldn't take her eyes off the metal door. It trembled on its hinges from the crowd noise, and it was a strong door, designed to resist autograph seekers indefinitely or fire for 30 minutes, but fear came straight through it. God, she whispered. Scared? Said Tom. Yeah, honestly, Tom, aren't you? She looked up at him. He shook his head and leaned back. Nah, he said. At my age, the big event isn't what scares you. Oh, so what is? Tom shrugged. You know, the lingering sensation that in pursuit of my own exacting goals and objectives, I might not have been as generous in spirit as I could have been with regard to the needs and dreams of the people I cared most about and for whom I was emotionally responsible. He popped the gum he was chewing and inspected his nails. Zoe seethed. From the stands above them, a fresh cheer shook the building. The announcer was whipping up the crowd. They roared Zoe's name. They stamped harder, and in the changing room the temporary strip light went off and flickered back to life by stuttering increments, and a sudden rill of dust fell from an unfinished break in the plasterboard ceiling, and Tom looked up and he said, do you think this building will hold? Zoe exploded. Shut up, will you? Shut up, shut up, shut up. Tom grinned. Come on. This is just another bike race. It's gravy. 5,000 people are not screaming for you, said Zoe. Tom leaned close and took her arm. You know what you should be scared of? The day they aren't shouting your name. Then you'll be like me. You'll be the dust collecting in the cracks beneath the boards of the track. You'll be the spit drying on the chewing gum stuck underneath the seats. You'll be the sound of the brooms sweeping up after the crowd has pissed off. You'd rather be all of that, would you? She shook her head, sulkily. And he cupped a hand around one ear. What? He said. I can't hear you over the noise of this crowd giving you all that love. Would you rather be the girl no one remembers? No. He smiled. Oh, all right then, he said. So now, get your ass out there and win. The two of them looked at the closed metal door, and then down at the floor, and then back at each other. Tom sighed. Well, he said, it was a nice pep talk though, wasn't it? I maybe peaked too soon. Zoe glared at him. She was ready to spit. Overhead, the crowd's stamping was incessant. Plaster dust fell continually now. She fixed her eyes on the door. Why don't they come? We've been down here forever. Said Tom. Yeah, maybe this is our personal hell. Maybe they never come. And the crowd just gets louder and louder, and we're left alone for eternity with our thoughts. Don't even joke, okay? Said Zoe. I feel guilty enough. Tom looked at her carefully. You feel guilty because of Kate? Zoe was surprised at the relief she felt when Tom said Kate's name. Underneath all the last-minute details of her preparation, the tightening of shoe cleats and the polishing of visors, she hadn't realized how much it had been eating her. Kate should be here, she said. It should be me and her in this final. Her coach squeezed her knee. Good girl. But look, you didn't force Kate to stay at home. She made her own choices. Still, no. I want you to say it, Zoe. I want to hear you say, Kate made her own choices. Zoe stared at the floor. The roar of the crowd accelerated every torpid molecule of the air in the little unfinished room. The vibration of their stamping feet rose through the steel frame of the bench and shimmied the white plastic seat beneath her. Slowly, she raised her eyes to her coaches. Kate made her choices, she said, and so did I. Tom held her gaze. Good, he said finally. And now, put it out of your mind, okay? That there is life, and this here is sport, and you only need to think about the next 10 minutes. She swallowed. All right. Ha, said Tom. Well then, don't look so terrified. But listen to that noise, Tom. I am terrified. No, no, no. Look, Zoe, you've done all the hard work. You've made it to the final. Your worst case scenario here is to be the second fastest rider on the entire planet. The very worst thing that could happen in the next 10 minutes is that you win an Olympic silver medal. Yeah, said Zoe, exactly. Oh, you're scared of getting silver? She thought about it and then nodded. Yeah, I'd rather die. Honestly? Honestly. She took a long, deep breath, and the trembling in her body subsided. When she looked back at Tom, he was smiling. What? She said. Young lady, I believe you're finally ready for your first Olympic final. Now look, do us both a favour and go up there and win it. But the door. Tom grinned. Oh yeah, the door was only ever in your mind. She stood up and pushed on the metal door with 2 fingers, tentatively. It swung open easily, on oiled hinges, and the roar of the crowd swelled louder. The door banged against its stop and rang with the deep note of a bell. She stared at him, wide-eyed. What? Said Tom, shooing her away. Go on, go, 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 go. You're really bloody late, as it happens. Zoe looked back at the open door and then at him. You're actually pretty good, she said. Yeah, said Tom. Get to my age, you'd better be. The tall, whitewashed stairwell leading up to the track was silvered with sunshine falling from the high skylights in the velodrome roof. On the wide white riser of the very last step, in blue stenciled letters that were nearly straight, the Olympic motto read, swifter, higher, stronger. Zoe breathed a deep, slow lungful of the hot, roaring air. The hairs rose on her neck. Everything that had passed was excused and gone and forgotten. The crowd was screaming her name. She smiled and breathed and took the first step up into the light. Thank you. As the book goes on, we learn about Zoe's rival, Kate. We learn a little bit more about her life. We discover that Kate and Jack have between them the responsibility of looking after their daughter, Sophie, who during the course of the book becomes very, very sick. And one of the things that I learned when I was researching sport is that really what we celebrate when we celebrate sport is health and vitality and the antithesis of everything that's to do with death and decay and entropy. And so I discovered that the right way for me to tell a story about sport was to interweave it with a story about ill health. And I hope that by putting the 2 things together in gold, I have shown 2 different kinds of struggle going on at the same time. One, a struggle of ambition, and one, a struggle for life itself. And I hope that the book asks in an interesting way, but doesn't answer, because I never like to give answers. I like to ask a question of myself and of the reader. How much of our ambition should we give up in the name of a greater gold? If you read the book, I really hope that you will enjoy it. And I certainly thank you very much for being here today. And I'd love to answer your questions. I'm conscious that people have jobs to go to and things to do, and I'm trying not to overrun the time. I hope I've left enough time for some questions, which I'd love to answer. Thank you. Hi.
Yes, you write wonderfully in the mind of women. You did it in Dear B, and it sounds like you've done it here again. Did you grow up with sisters?
I grew up with a great mum, and she was really the big influence on me as a writer. So my mum always made sure, as we were growing up, that there was another book, just, conveniently placed so that we could discover it ourselves, and it felt like our decision. And she really helped my brother and I to grow up with books.
At
And
any
she,
point, had you considered writing about the lives of male athletes? Or
yeah, the reason, so I started writing about female points of view in my first book, Incendiary, and the reason was that I never wanted to write about myself, and I still don't. So my work is very research-based, and I feel that it's a hybrid between reportage and fiction. So I like to go out there and discover in the world a real story that's happening, and hopefully a story that's much bigger than me or anything that's happening in my life. So my novels are not about re-examining my own memory. They're about going out and researching and finding out. And I started writing from a female point of view, first of all, to make sure that I wasn't writing about my own life. And so I started observing more closely, listening harder, and trying to understand, effortfully understand different people's perspectives. So I cross these boundaries of gender, of sexuality, of ethnicity, of age, whenever I pick up the pen. That's the rule I have for myself. And when it came to writing Gold and to writing about the lives of athletes, to your very good question, I did have a choice. So should I write about male competitors or female competitors? My novel is asking this question: how much of our ambition should we give up in the name of love? And this is a question that is asked much more pointedly of female athletes than of male athletes. One of my great heroes is a cyclist called Mark Cavendish. He's a British road cyclist who recently, with his partner, had a daughter. This is a very joyful occasion. He missed a week of racing and then carried on winning. I'd like to compare and contrast that with another of my heroes, who's a marathon runner called Paula Radcliffe. Having a baby took 2 years out of her competitive life at exactly the point when she was on the absolute high point of her game, and it afforded 2 years' worth of wins to all of her rivals. It's a completely different game. So women athletes are being asked at exactly the point where they reach the top of the tree in their sport after 20 years sometimes of training. Like, a lot of these people have been training since they were 8 and they suddenly reach the top of their game, and they're asked at exactly the same point, really, you're going to settle down and have children? It's not a question that male athletes have to answer. So writing a book about female athletes, you realize actually they're giving up a lot more, they're sacrificing more, they're focusing harder, they're doing more emotional and psychological work than their male peers. And they were psychologically deeper, therefore, and more interesting to write about. And that's why it's a rivalry between two female athletes. Good question, thank you. Hi.
What was your research process for Little B?
For Little B, I did 3 different kinds of research. The first happened completely by accident and was also the inspiration for the book. So when I was at university, we would all do summer jobs to pay the rent. And one of the jobs I was a casual labourer. I would work in fields, factories, construction sites, whatever was available. The deal was, in fact, that you turned up at 6 in the morning to a place where they would take you on a bus out to wherever the work was that day. And one of those days, the work was in the kitchen of an immigration detention centre. And this was a place called Campsfield House, just outside Oxford. And we went there, and they told us it was a prison. And it wasn't. I mean, the people who were there turned out to be refugees from all over the world, from Sierra Leone and from Rwanda, and Botswana, from Nigeria, from Jamaica, from the Balkans, from all over, from China. And they had been detained with no release date, arbitrarily. They hadn't committed a crime. And I found myself there serving them vegetables, completely randomly. Got talking with them. discovered that a lot of them were amazing storytellers, which I really admire, because I believe that there is a certain power in being able to tell your own story effectively. It was one of the tools that these people had deployed in order to survive as far as they had, to convince people, including border guards and state officials, of their story. That's how I got into it. So the first part was random and experiential. The second, when I started to really research the story, was very formalized and interview-based. So I sought out a lot of refugees, and sadly, this is really easy to do. There are a lot of refugees in the world, and if you go to a charity that works with them, there is no shortage of people who are refugees and are happy to tell you their story. So I interviewed dozens of refugees, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm not the greatest interviewer. I don't ask these very pointed questions. I just tend to turn the microphone on and say, "So tell me what happened to you," and every now and then I'll nod and fetch tea or whatever is required, and these people would slowly tell me their stories, and because I don't have an agenda, I'm not an immigration official. I don't have any power over them. They would tell me their life story. And I discovered things, about the refugee experience. I discovered things about the horrors that these people had fled from. I learned things that I wish I could unlearn about people's capacity for cruelty and for torture. It's that we, as humans, have this amazing capacity for imagination. It's one of the most beautiful things about us. And when that is perverted into the service of evil, for want of a better word, people's inventiveness in dreaming up extraordinary ways to make other people suffer is something that I wish I could unlearn. The way in which people are made complicit in their own torture and the torture of their family members and loved ones is the most horrible set of things I've ever learned. A lot of very harrowing interviews with refugees. And a lot of stuff that made me very angry about the treatment that refugees subsequently get when they come to my country, to Britain, where we are obliged, really morally and legally, to help them, but don't, and detain them instead, and write them off as if they had no value to us, as if they could only be a problem. The third kind of research I did was very immersive. So I needed to get, and much more technical. I needed to get speech patterns right. I needed to learn my history of the region. I needed to manage to express myself from the points of view in the first person of my characters from Nigeria and from Jamaica and from Sri Lanka. And so I spent a lot of time listening to the radio. I made a rule for myself that I was only going to get my world news for 6 months from Nigerian radio stations, which you can do now with the internet. You can tune in to Port Harcourt radio and get your news from there. Why not? And I also listened to talk radio from Nigeria and discovered that talk radio, weirdly, is the same everywhere in the world. Someone with very strong opinions, as acting as a foil to people who call in to talk about taxes or sports results or whatever. But I was listening to that in Nigerian English, until by immersing myself in it, my ear became tuned into it, and I could express myself in that register and start to work out, how Little B's journey from speaking in that register to speaking what she calls, ironically, the Queen's English, how that journey maps itself out linguistically, because I became more and more convinced that it's the way we speak that defines us, and the way we tell our stories and the register in which we tell them. That's how people judge us. So there were 3 strands of research. One was experiential and happened quite by accident. One was formalized in terms of interviews, and one was immersive. I tried to drown myself in the speech that I was trying to report until it became almost like a native part of me. And yeah, and those three strands came together into the research for the book. And it's never a neat process. You never finish your research and think, now I shall write. You know, it's iterative. You keep going back to it. Yeah. So,
Speaking of the Queen, did you participate in the Queen's Jubilee celebration?
I did.
And what do you think of the Queen?
That's a great question. Thank you. See, I did. I'm pretty much on record as not being the staunchest monarchist in Britain. I've written scenes where my protagonists are sick on Prince William's shoes, very symbolically there. You know, I don't believe that we should have a monarchy. I think it demeans all of us in Britain. I think we should grow up and be bigger than that and do something very sensible that you guys did here, which was declare a democracy. It amazes me that we still haven't. Having said that, I have nothing against the monarch herself, and I think she's terrific. You know, it's not her fault that she was born into that job that we should have made obsolete. And I had a terrific time with the Jubilee celebrations. I went to a village called Streatley in Oxfordshire, and we took part in what was the longest street party in British history, the physically longest. So between two villages, Streatley and Headley, they had stretched trestle tables, and they were 7 miles long. 7 miles of trestle tables with Union flag tablecloths, and everyone was invited to bring a hamper with food and wine and to share with the neighbouring tables. The idea was that you would share your food with people you'd never met over this, and it was 7 miles of it. And being Britain, it lasted 3 hours under the driving rain. And this had been planned for, because we're very good at planning for these contingencies. And someone showed up with a truck full of ponchos, like rain ponchos, in red, white, and blue. It was a really nice touch. So our kids were there in their little ponchos. And it was one of the nicest occasions I've ever been part of. Dissolved a lot of my cynicism about the occasion. It was a real national coming together. It was great fun, and made you think maybe there is some charm in the institution of the monarchy after all. So, yeah, I'm not so hard-bitten that I can't be moved by those things. And yeah, it was great. It was a good national day. We all enjoyed it, I think.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thanks.
I
Hi.
just would like to say that I finished the book the other day, as I mentioned to you. You have achieved your aim, and I must say I do admire you cycling as you do it. I mean, it comes over in the book that you really know what you're talking about. And thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, in reading Little Bee, did you have more than one ending? And why did you pick that one? I found that was the most disturbing part of the book. I loved the book, and I loved the way you wrote it.
So it's a great question. Thank you. Well, I struggled with this for a while to answer that question, and then at one of the events, a reader came up with an answer which ever afterwards I've pretended was mine. And she said, the book leaves you with a stone in your shoe, which I really like, and it wasn't really my intention, but I think that is the effect. I think I left the ending ambiguous because, as I've mentioned, that I try to set up an ethical question in an interesting way, but I don't presume to have the answer to that question. So the question in Little Bee is, should we step out of our comfort zone in order to help someone else into it? I don't know the extent to which we should do that. Right? I don't know. What should you do? Should you give away $10, 10% of your income, a finger? You know, what would you do to help a stranger? I don't know what the limit of charity is or the desirable extent of it, but I hope to ask that question. And so, if the book had had a happy ending, right? If Little Bee had been saved by Sarah's efforts, then I'm answering the question. I'm saying Sarah has done enough here. That's an exemplary life, and I wasn't trying to do that. If I had a sad ending, if Little B very clearly dies at the end, then again, I'm answering a question that I wanted to ask but not answer. I'm saying, okay, Sarah has not done enough for Little B here. And also, you know, I'd kind of got fond of the character and just didn't want her to die at the end. And so those were my reasons. But actually, I think the reader put it better. So the book leaves you with a stone in your shoe, because the plight of refugees in our society is kind of a stone in our shoe. It's not possible to completely enjoy the privileges and the freedoms we have, while simultaneously knowing that a lot of people don't share those privileges and are suffering right now really badly. You know, so I think the ambiguity of that ending, the way it grates and stays with you, although, you know, I can't take credit for consciously doing that. I think that is the way the book turned out, and I think that's one of the effects of it. Leaves you with a stone in your shoe. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Really enjoyed being here. And yes, thank you. And Chris can stay to sign books. He has to get on the road by about 10:30. So please, if you have some questions or would like to have him sign a book, he will be here for a few minutes with Kathleen in the back. And join us for our next author, Liza Klausman. She's on Thursday, the 26th at 7 p.m. This is her first novel. It's a mystery, Tigers in Red Weather, and she is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Herman Melville. So she might have some interesting family stories to tell. Thank you so much for coming. Yes. Oh, thank you. It was a treat that you were able to work us into your